Good morning, everybody. We're so glad you could join us. Welcome to another Wednesday webinar, which is proudly sponsored by the Dairy Standard Agency. I'm Jacqueline Oudendal from the DSA, and Jan-Riek Klopper from Plaas Media will facilitate the question and answer session at the end of the presentation. Special thanks to Plaas Media for their marketing and technical support. We have a really relevant hot topic today. An overview of the South African dairy industry regulatory landscape and amendment process. And we are really fortunate to not only have one, but two experts, Anneke van Niekerk and Thabang Rampa, with us to share their expertise on this matter. You are welcome, and I know that you are going to have questions, to write your questions in the question bar, or you can raise your hand during the Q&A session to ask your questions directly to the presenters. Yandri then will allow you to speak, but you still have to unmute yourself on your device. So please just remember to unmute yourself. It gives me a real great pleasure to introduce Anneke van Niekerk from Food Fine Print and Thabang Rampa from the Dairy Standard Agency. And I'm going to give over to you, Anneke. We are looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much to the team from Plaas Media. We're very excited today to discuss this topic. As you know, those who know me personally knows that I can speak about this topic for ages. So today we're focusing on the overview of the South African dairy industry regulatory landscape. So we're just going to zoom in on what is happening at the moment and also what can we expect in terms of the next few months, perhaps even next few weeks. So firstly, I'd like to start just to check that everyone is happy and seeing it. And please do comment to us or send us a note immediately if you can't see anything or you're missing any information. So let's kick off. Today we want to have a look. We just have a screen here that's not quite connecting. Hold on 1 second. Perhaps that's my mistake. There we go. Okay, clicking on the wrong screen. Today we're looking at two parts. So firstly, we're looking at the latest developments in regulatory landscape, a snapshot of total regulations, but then we want to zoom a little bit more into the draft amendment we received last week, Wednesday, from Department of Agriculture. So we received a March document and we received a May document, and we're going to zoom a little bit in on the May document. Then in that discussion, we have the restrictions, definitions, changes. We have some new interesting class designations which have been added. We are going to look at the amendments to existing classes and provisions. So that's typically the most relevant discussion for today. And then some amendments editing that have minimal impact, but it streamlines the document, the regulation for implementation, and also for equal playing field, which is what the idea is of updated regulations. So lastly, I'm going to briefly touch on regulatory resources, how DSA is stepping into that space, assisting the industry, and also as an extension from Milk SA, giving guidelines and a collective platform where the information is available. Part 2 will be done by Thabang Rampa. We've been working on this project since 22 March. We were just looking at the folder dates to see it's been a welcome journey. So the latest development snapshot we have firstly up is one which is quite interesting. Some people have never or will never work with this document. It was published in March this year, where Turkey was added as a country that can import products into South Africa. So they may export, therefore we may import from them. This document was updated in 2017, and then we had two quick updates, 2025 July, and now March 2026. It's a list in alphabetical order, so every time you want to see if there's an update, you have to go and look for the added country. This is interesting, of course, for companies that import and would like to import new additional products. Then a new regulation which was published in February has an impact on the whole food industry, specifically the dairy industry. So three aspects there that I'd like to highlight. The ready-to-eat and contaminated food definitions was added to the regulation, which is specifying the maximum levels of mycotoxins. So we have luckily a 24 months implementation period. Therefore, we have some time to still adjust the budgets and ensure that we have compliance in terms of testing. So the two regulations that are relevant for the dairy industry specific is the milk testing of aflatoxin A1, the increase of a 10-fold maximum level. So it went from a 0.05 microgram per liter to 0.5, 10-fold increase. It is very, very much discussed in the international circles as well. So that's something for us to implement. Then also total and aflatoxin B1 testing is now required for all ready-to-eat products. But you can have a look at this document for implementation. So, oh dear, I think I didn't skip that. Apologies. So here's what I've just been talking about, the 0.5 and the 0.05 to 0.5. Okay. Then we have a document which is pending. This is the draft regulation that we have received, R5506. It was 1 November last. In 2024, we had 3 months to comment. In essence, the GSFA additive database is being referenced as the go-to, the reference guide in terms of which raw materials is permitted to be used in different product food categories. So if we have a look at the relevance to dairy specifically, the usage levels for natamycin in dairy is specified, and cheese surface treatment with natamycin is at this point the only use of natamycin, which is permitted by GSFA. So what we've seen in the regulation and also in the comments from the industry is that there's a significant impact if we are to refer to the GSFA Codex Alimentarius for a reference to food additives. So what we're seeing as well is that this document is a reference, however, exemptions are added in the document. So the comments that's been submitted from the industry specifically requests exemptions for product categories, for GMP levels or maximum levels. So we're seeing a lot of discussion here, and we're hoping to have a final document this year still. We don't have clear timeline reference, but I think the biggest impact there is definitely the processed meat industry. Then we look at a new activity. So on the front of pack labeling that was part of the regulation 3337, the labeling regulation. What we've seen there, I mean, all of the comments was already submitted in 2023. It's almost forgotten for some of us. But what they've recently requested in April, they requested a technical comments engagement session. So the CGCSA and FSI services is supporting this in terms of discussions. So this week, Friday, we will have the first session discussing the 205 pages of technical comments that have been submitted. Relevance to dairy here is that the mandatory warning triangles that are required for front of pack labeling is specifically focused on high in sugar, saturated fat and sodium. So we, from a Milk SA portfolio, has submitted scientific submissions. We have specifically pointed out that unique nutrient-dense nature of dairy would position ourselves to a point where we would like to have exclusion on core dairy categories. So plain milk, plain yogurt, where there is a dairy matrix advantage and where we would be able to motivate this. Then we get to the big discussion of today. So for us, today is majority of our discussion is going to be around the second draft amendment, which we received on Wednesday. It's in every way hot off the press. Purity has confirmed as well on Friday, and on Monday, even more emails to say that we will not engage in another comments period. We will not have more industry consultation. We will proceed directly to WTO publishing. So Thabang is going to take us through the amendment process in much detail. But luckily, we have an implementation period for this document of 18 months. So this accounts for UHT milk that has typically longer lead times, printing times that are international. So this is a favorable situation in terms of implementation. So let's get down to the inside information. So if we have a look at what has changed, so the regulation's name has changed. The use of the word imitation is no longer part of the regulation. So this concept has moved to dairy-related products. Then also, a definition has been included for dairy alternative products. So dairy alternative products is a group name that refers to plant-based products that are free from dairy, so dairy-free or non-dairy. Then we have the group that have both dairy and some non-dairy, so what we jokingly call the hybrid products, so the modified dairy products. These products are made from pure primary dairy products with an additional milk or protein content. So if we have a look at that, here in red, we see the changes that have been made. What we have motivated from a scientific point is that modified dairy products will not have the same nutritive values. So this was part of the definition, and we motivated it to be removed, or that we rather focus on the fact that it is in general appearance, presentation, use, and composition similar to a primary dairy product. Then something which has in the last meeting been added to one of the definitions was plant-based. We're not entirely, I don't think this is a scientific-based definition. So I think if we get to the application where it is used in the regulation, it's more of a descriptor or a type of product instead of that it is required to be a scientifically sound definition. But let's get there. So if we have a look at the restrictions that have been introduced into this regulation, restrictions is always in the beginning of the regulation. And so this is really to guide the reader or the person that is considering the regulation, whether this is relevant to their product. So it helps with interpretation and also with implementation. And what this regulation has done really well, or the draft has done really well, is to say what it is not relevant to. It helps also the inspectors or the people that are required to inspect the imported products to know exactly whether this product is relevant. So if we have a look at what it shall not apply to, it's specifically giving the definition of infant formula, the fat spreads, the foodstuffs that are containing dairy, but is not a primary dairy product. for example, a chocolate mousse or a cheesecake, and it is very, very closely associated to dairy, but it is not in true sense a primary dairy product. And then the last bullet is the foodstuffs that are products with dairy terms, but are generally used. So it's something that's long established and that we're all well aware of. So examples there would be peanut butter, cream crackers, creamed spinach. And these last two bullet points is one of the products or one of the results from the GSUDT, so the General Standard for the Use of Dairy Terms. And this is an international document that was compiled in 2019 and implemented across the world to ensure that there's really a sense of uniqueness and a sense of integrity when dairy terms are used. So in the regulations throughout the world, you'll see these requirements being introduced and upheld as far as possible. Then we also see new product class designations. So this is the exciting part. I find that always very good to keep innovation going and to make sure that the industry has a relevant and up-to-date regulation, and that is not just a document that's filed somewhere. Then if we have a look at these, goat milk now has a class designation. It's included in table 1 with cow milk, so it's specifically split out. Then we have full fat ricotta and full cream ricotta added as an additional class. And also together with that, ricotta as an alternative class designation for the medium fat ricotta. So we had a long discussion regarding that and also the international positioning of ricotta. So that's a promising addition to the regulation. In terms of popped cheese and cheese pups, there's some commercial products already out there, and it has been done with dispensations for many years. And so the question is just whether it should be part of the regulation. So it's been introduced in table 13. Then high-fat custard, low-fat custard, and fat-free custard. So we've always had custard, and we've had custard with added foodstuffs, but there's been a split in terms of the fat contents. So this is an interesting specialization of custard. Interesting to note is that the full fat and the medium fat has been grouped together. So that's quite a wide fat content group, and it is not the same as milk, but you can find that in table 20. So then we move on to more information in terms of class designations. So if we have a look at these, this cannot really be quantified as a number of class designations that's been added. It's more of a concept that's been added in the regulation. And this is to bridge the gap between primary dairy products and modified and imitation dairy products. So imitation dairy products in the old or the current regulation, Regulation 1510, is referring to products that have very little dairy, but it could have some dairy. It was not specific in Regulation 1510 that it must be without dairy. Modified dairy had to have the majority of the product must have been dairy. So in this case, what has been done for Regulation 22 and 23, the concept of modified, mixture of, blend of, or blended can precede the class designation. So in either one of those four can be used to indicate that there's been a blend of an existing primary dairy product with another product. So the product then has to be either fat or protein. So you can see as an examples, modified full fat milk with perhaps coconut oil, or perhaps, so there's a whole world of possibilities that can be used here. What we also see here is a blended full fat milk and whichever name of fat is added to it. So this is if a portion of the fat content has been exchanged with a non-dairy fat. Then what we also see is that there's a definition in terms of modified dairy products, and it says here that it must be manufactured by blending a primary dairy product with or without added foodstuff, with fat and or protein obtained from a source, the primary from any other source of dairy product. So then we move on. So what we're expecting is that the modified that I was just mentioning is going to have quite a far-reaching impact. And we'll have to watch the space. Then we have a new product class, coconut milk and coconut cream. Specific compositional standards have been introduced. So sub-regulation 25.415. It used to be only mentioned into the table as one of the products, but now there is a full sub-regulation specifying the fats and the moisture content, and so there's quite a lot of detail around that. If we look at table 21, table 21 is probably the biggest change in terms of regulation 1510. Here we have various types of alternative products. I'm going to show in the next slide different types of them. And all of these have been described as plant-based. Also, what we see is that the table only refers to the class designations or the naming requirements, and no compositional requirements are stated. This is a big change compared to the previous regulation, because we've come to the point where we've had many years of discussions, and by specifying the name of the dairy alternative products, we have to a degree also an implementation of the GSUDT, so the general standard of the use of dairy terms. So we are giving a guideline in terms of the naming, but because it's not a dairy product, we feel that it's not a compositional requirement. It's not the forum to give a compositional requirement. So if we have a look at the sentence at the bottom, sub-regulation 29.3, the expression with name of the fat shall immediately follow the applicable class designation of a dairy alternative product, except in the case where the class designation includes the indication of the added fat. So in this way, we're specifying, similar to the way that the modified butter was done, but now it's just for all dairy alternative products. This is a requirement. So if we have a look at some examples, so this is just to give you an idea of how much or how many different changes there's been in table 21. So it used to be table 22, as you see, but now it's table 21. The reason for that is that the modified butter table has moved out of the regulation and moved to part 2. So here you can see we had the class designation. We didn't have an alternative class designation in regulation 1510. Now we have a class designation and an alternative class designation. Everything in blue shows what has been changed. What we've noticed, and it's a little bit of if you've been in the project from the very beginning, you'll also notice it on your side. Regulation 1510 has a certain set of information, and then there's been 3 different drafts. Thabang is going to talk us through all of this. And what we've seen, or what we've noticed in the last draft that was published, or the second edition of the latest draft, is that not all of the changes compared to R1510 was noted. So it makes it quite difficult to see what was really changed. So what we've received from the department the red, which is indicating changes, but the blue was actually also all changed. If you take it all the way back to R1510, what they've in the last version shared with us is that only the changes between draft 1 and draft 2. And so that's not really reflecting all the changes and the implication to the industry. So if we go ahead to the next slide, These are the amendments to the existing class designations. So this is definitely the part of the presentation where everyone's going to sit up, where artwork designers are going to listen, where the brand managers are going to listen, where everyone's going to see, oh, what artwork needs to change. Remember, we have 18 months, and this has not yet been published as a draft, so we're expecting that in the next few weeks. But let's quickly run through them. So on the cheese side, they've had a very specific reference to the flavor strength linked to the maturity of a particular type cheese. And it's very important, it does not form part of the class designation. So this is to a degree of prohibition that has been added. The medium fat cream cheese, you'll see in table 14, the fat and dry matter has changed to align it to Codex. So there's been changes. Have a look. I'm not going to, I mean, in terms of time, we don't have time to look at every single change, but I'm just mentioning it to you so you can have a look in the details. Then on the butter side, additional class was added and alternative class designations added for butters with added foodstuffs. So until now, there wasn't specific lines indicated for that. As previously mentioned, the custard in table 20 is now with 4 different fat classes. The plain custard is associated with medium and full fat, while the other classes have been added. And then the last one, cultured dairy alternative products. Specific organisms that are emphasized on the artwork shall also be 10 to the power of 6. So there's been a minimum compositional requirement added for cultured dairy alternative products. Then if we have a look at sub-regulation 27, this is referring to the country of origin. So this is quite a big change in terms of alignment throughout the business. If you are producing different products, this is different to R337 or the current R146. Here we have agricultural concept that if a main ingredient originates from a different country than the place of manufacture, then both needs to be declared on the artwork. So as we discussed in the technical work group as well, this will have far-reaching implications and be a costly exercise, but it is something that is also aligned with international trends and what we see in Europe as well. Then we have a look at the amendments to the hamper or gift pack definition. So they've added the concept of platter as well here. And the reason why that's important for us is that the class designation needs to be shown in different ways for a platter and a hamper and a gift pack. Then also the provision for a dominant flavor. So this is relevant to the modified milk groups. So these are if a product is made with almond milk and oat milk, but the oat milk is not a pronounced flavor, then the almond can be in a larger size. Then sub-regulation 29.5, provision for deflavored foodstuff or fruit addition, and it does not need to be shown in the class designation. So this typically would be a compound product or a smoothie, something in that direction. Then we have a look at the sub-regulation 29.11. Here we have an addition of the concept of vintage. So we used to always have a mature cheddar or mature cheese, sorry for that cheddar, but mature, and now the expression vintage with the definition of vintage was added for the cheese section. Then sub-regulation 30, we have milkshake added together with milk and cream. And now milkshake also needs to show what heat treatment was applied to it. If we have a look at sub-regulation 31, imported products would require a specific detail regarding the address. So if you have a look at 31B, imported products that are showing an address needs to have the address as well indicated from the foreign manufacturer or the packer. So this is interpretation. So it's something that every company needs to do depending on how they present the address, physical address on the artwork. SAPA Regulation 33, we have the duplication of a class designation and alternate class designation. This is allowed for certain products. So if you have a look here, different cheese names, as an example, may be used on the same artwork to show maybe a different understanding to the consumer. So yes, here you can see table 11, both the class designation and the alternate class designation may be shown on the artwork. So here we get to a lot of new information. Restrictions on the container. So this is for the artwork designers and brand managers. The black is the information that was already present. So we're used to that information, but here we have some new provisions. The provision of paragraph A shall not be applicable to an illustration or depiction of an actual dairy product or dairy-related product. And then there's certain conditions. So provided that any foodstuff depicted with the product for visual effect may not create the impression that it is part of the product. For example, plain yogurt in a bowl with one strawberry on top for visual effect is allowed, but not various cut pieces of strawberry depicted in the plain yogurt. So this, in our discussions, could be quite problematic for implementation and interpretation by inspectors. So this is one of the areas that we have raised some concern, but this is also something that we need to give some opportunity for it to see how it's going to work in the next coming weeks or months. Then also there's a depiction of the drinking glass and glass jug that's with white color, so that's not permitted for products that are non-dairy. And then the last one is provided that actual product is also depicted, for example, cream being poured over strawberries or coffee creamer being added to a cup of coffee. So this is where the intended use of the dairy product is used on the artwork. So if we have a look at the next one, the restrictions on containers, this is a bit of a GSUDT, so general use of the dairy terms. It has been put together in the original draft and then split again, and so it's been taken into different forms. But in essence, it says that we shouldn't intentionally spell milk in a different way for dairy alternative products. So dairy-related products shall be presented in a way that it is not misleading and that it's clear, it's not devaluing dairy. The pictorial devices should not be misleading or imply that it is a dairy product. So this has been a discussion from the very beginning. This was also the initiation of the Regulation 1510 review. So in March 2022, already we started this project, and this was one of the main reasons for the review. So we're very happy to see us going into the regulation and finalized in a very streamlined manner. It started off with much discussion. And then we have a look here. These are the amendments that are not that important, but very important from a regulatory point of view. So they're not going to have very much impact in terms of compositional standards or anything like that, but it is cleaning up and editing the regulation so it flows naturally. So if we have a look here, modified butters was moved to part 2. We also see that in various tables, I would say almost all the tables, there's been the concept of closing the decimal gap. So in the case where, so I just took one of the examples. Here previously we had less than 0.5, and here we have more than 0.5. That means there's a decimal gap in the middle. So 0.5 is not anywhere. It's kind of a no man's land. So this was we've built the bridge, and we said changing the wording slightly closes the decimal gap and has minimal impact in terms of compositional standards. Then the last one is removing the repetitive references. So in every single standard, there used to be a reference that says this compositional standard is shown in that table. So we've removed, this has been removed in the draft, and so it really flows easier, more natural. So then I'd like to invite you to also make a use of the resources that DSA has. So we are available at info@dairy-standard or via the website. You can also familiarize yourself with the legislation and the guidelines. If you have some browsing time and you want to have a look, we have organized the DSA website in the way that all the different departments that are doing the regulations is listed, and as soon as you click on them, there's a whole drop-down list with the live links to all the different regulations. This is a very handy tool, and between Thabang and myself, Thabang updates this and tries to keep it updated as much as possible. So yeah, this is a very, especially in a relatively segmented regulatory space, this is a very handy tool. And now we move over to Thabang. The questions are going to follow at the very end. Jacqueline's going to facilitate that for us.
Thank you, Jacqueline, for this opportunity once more. And thank you, Anneke, for the interesting presentation. So now, everyone, let's now listen into the second segment of our webinar. And it will be dealing with the overview now of the South African Dairy Regulatory Amendment process. Right. This process can be lengthy and complex, and it tends to raise a number of questions of uncertainty within the industry as to when is the process going to end, what is the next step from where we are. So this presentation seeks to provide answers to some of those questions that are then set. Now, before we can begin, it's important that we then get to look at, firstly, why are regulations amended? This is in response to your food safety incidents, like your 2017 listeriosis outbreak. And secondly, this is also to align our local regulation with international standards, like your Codex Alimentarius standards. And thirdly, this is in response to the innovation within the different industries that are taking place, and also their related technological development. And also this is done also in response to the gap that has been seen in order to offer our consumers protection, wherein a better labeling of nutritional information can then be prescribed. Again, let's look at who can initiate this regulation amendment. The government departments, as administrators of the regulation, can do so, because the mandate of the acts under which these regulations are promulgated falls under their responsibilities. Again, the industry stakeholders can also request such an amendment after noting existing gaps. So they can then request the department to just quickly initiate such a process. Now, within this presentation, the regulatory amendment process is divided into 3 stages. So the first stage is the drafting stage. starting with step 1, where the evaluation of information and also the gathering of information takes place. In the background, the departments get to conduct desktop research and align the local regulations with the international standard as much as possible, and also look into regulations of other countries that are similar, to look into what is out there. Scientific publication of reputable journals are also consulted, and all that information then moves the process to step 2, wherein a first draft is prepared. And now at this stage, now also in the background within the department, then your legislative drafting principles are looked into. There's also extensive discussion and regarding the draft as well. And all that takes place. And when the department deems now the draft ready, then the process moves over to step 3, wherein now a submission is then sent into to the minister for the request to publish a notice in the government gazette to invite industry comments. Upon that approval being granted by the minister, then the process moves over to step 4, where now a notice to invite public comments is then published on the government gazette, and that then concludes the drafting stages. And over to the second stage, which is the consultation stage. Now that first draft is then circulated to stakeholders for comments, and it is also placed on the department's website for information and for reference. And upon the closing date, right, and that would be, that will cite the closing of the commenting period, then all those comments then the process moves over to step 6, wherein the received comments are then collated, and the department gets to respond to all the individual received comments, and seeing also in their discretion, some of the comments are then incorporated into a second draft. And when all that process has been done, then the process now moves to step 7, wherein now that second draft that's been prepared is then shared with the stakeholders, and the template with those comments and the response, the department response to them, is also shared. The process then moves over to step 8, looking at what is there and what the department has then received. The process can then repeat, where we can then now see the repeat of step 5 and 6, if that the department deems it necessary to produce your third draft, amendment regulation, 4th or 5th, and upon consensus being reached and the department is satisfied with what they have in their draft, then a closure meeting is then held, and all the resulting document, resulting amendment, draft amendment is then looked into, and upon their satisfaction that it is done, then the process moves on to step 9, where a submission is then sent en route to the DG this time to seek approval to submit a draft to the WTO for notification. It has to be noted that South Africa, as a WTO state, we have to notify our intention to amend a regulation at the WTO. and regulation that can lead to trade barriers. And this process then is then submitted, and all that has to take place in 60 days. So now it's been notified for 60 days at the WTO. And this sees the end of the consultation stage. And over to the final stage. Now that WTO notification gets to be submitted via the SABS. The department gets to respond to comments or inquiries received from other WTO member states, if any are received. And now that resulting draft is then finalized at step 11. And all your I's are then dotted and all your T's are crossed, and page numbering gets to be looked into to ensure that everything is in chronological order. And once that is done, then the process then moves over to step 12, where finally the minister is requested for approval to publish the finalized amended regulation. And upon such a permission being granted, then the process moves over to step 13, where now finally the finalized amended regulation gets to be submitted to the government printing works for publication in the Government Gazette. And once that is done, then it's the final step of this long process at step 14. Then the final amended regulation gets to be assigned an R number, and it is published. And finally, that this now finalized amended regulation gets to be shared with stakeholders, and it is also then placed on the government website for reference and information. Now, with all this information that we have now, one gets to wonder, where are we in terms of the two regulations that are important to the dairy industry? I'm referring to the amendment of the dairy regulation and the amendment of the labeling regulation. Now, let's look into where are we in terms of the amendment of regulation 1510, which is your dairy regulation. In step 1, that took place, which dates back to March 2022. I know Anneke also indicated this. This has been long coming. This was initiated by the Milk SA shortly after the conclusion of the amendment of the GSUDT, which is your Codex General Standard for the Use of Dairy Terms. So just after that, the department was then approached, and all that information gathering and all of that took place, and also saw where we had our industry-wide online meeting on the brief overview of the proposed dairy regulation amendment. And all that went into step 2 in the preparation for the first draft amendment. With all the process being done, and the Department of Agriculture deeming that now this is ready for circulation to the industry, then the process then moved to step 3, where a submission was then sent in through to the minister to request the publication of a notice to request for industry comments. Then that was obviously and then approved by the minister, because then the process then moved over to step 4, wherein that notice R6501 was then published in the Government Gazette on the 15th of August, 2025. So then that saw the end of your drafting stage of this amendment regulation. And moving over to the consultation stage, that first draft was then further circulated on the 19th of August 2025 to the industry stakeholders, and we were actually excited to have that, and it was circulated with the closing date 30 days after the publication. And after that, the closing date, the process then moved over to step 6. The department collated the comments into a template, responded to individual comments submitted, and also incorporated some of the comments received into a second draft. And after concluding that step, and step 7 came into play, where we saw the publication, the circulation of the second draft amendment on the 4th of March 2026, and shortly after that, an online closure meeting to discuss the second draft was held on the 20th of March, and however, the further comments were then submitted. And the process then moved over to step 8, wherein comments that were submitted on the online closure during the online closure meeting was then incorporated by the department. All those comments that they deem are necessary to be incorporated into the third draft was then incorporated, and on the 7th of April 2026, the draft was circulated. And also on that, upon the circulation, further comments were then submitted, and there we saw the circulation now of what technically is the 4th draft amendment, or on the 20th of May last week, 2026. It was circulated for comments for only 2 days. This is where we are currently in terms of the amendment of the Dairy Regulation 1510, the drafting process. This is where we are. But then let's look at a bird's eye view of exactly where we are. We now know that the drafting stage has been concluded, and now we are at the consultation stage. The department has indicated, as Anneke has indicated, that no further online meeting will be held to discuss the resulting draft amendment. However, they have indicated that a draft that is intended for notification at the WTO will be shared with the stakeholders, but only for information sharing purposes, and no further comments would then be considered. And as now we know, the final stage will then take place. To be noted, I know also Anneke touched on this, when the final amended regulation is published, one needs to take note of the commencement date. So far, what has been indicated on the draft for now is that the final publication will only come into force after 18 months after the publication date. That is important because then this render this draft, even though published, not actually in force, only after 18 months after the publication. And now let's go and look. Let's go over to the amendment of the labeling regulation, R146 by the Department of Health. The evaluation and information gathering process dates back on this one to your draft labeling amendment that was published on, which is your R429. in 2014. So now this actually goes way back. That was published as a draft for comments. However, it was never concluded and was never further finalized. The process, all that information and additional work that the Department of Health has done moved over the process to step 2 and saw the preparation of the first draft amendment regulation. Upon the satisfaction of the Department of Health, then a submission in step 3 was then submitted to the minister to request for the publication of what now is the draft amendment regulation to be published in the Government Gazette to invite public comments. So now you'll see that there's a difference. Department of Agriculture will publish a notice to invite comments. However, the Department of Health actually publish the whole document for public comments. So now that saw the conclusion of your okay, now let's saw the conclusion of your your drafting stage. Now we're moving over to your consultation stage that saw the publication of your 264-page draft amendment, were numbered R3337 in the Government Gazette on the 1st of April 2023. It was published for comments for that as a commenting period lasted for 3 months. After that, it was also then in step 5 arranged for it to be placed on the department website for reference and information. And upon the closing date of the commenting period, then the process moved over to now where we are in step 6, where the department had received a number, I mean, a lot comments, because now this regulation covers a whole spectrum of food products, not just the dairy. So comments were then collated into a template. The department is actually also busy with responding to individual comments, also following up and requesting clarity from the stakeholders that actually submitted those comments. And some of the comments received were then also considered to be incorporated into your second draft. So that is where we are, and let's look at the overview of the draft. We know the drafting stage has passed. We are now at the consultation stage also. However, communication, as Anneke has mentioned, in February was circulated to say the resulting draft amendment is to be formally tabled at NEDLAC. NEDLAC is your National Economic Development and Labour Council, and that is to be tabled at their trade and industry chambers. This is where in representative of the government, labor, business, and community organization will deliberate on the resulting draft amendment. This is due to its anticipated profound socio-economic impact that it will have after the publication and after coming into force. So now we know the final stage will take place. However, to be noted is a different commencement date of specified regulations that have been indicated on the draft up to now, with some provision being specified to come into force on the same day, some 6 months after the publication, and some 12 months after the publication, and some up to 24 months after the publication. Now, with all of this that I have indicated, is important that we also get to highlight the importance of industry participation in this process, because it results in practical regulation and also, secondly, in scientific accurate regulations, and also improves compliance and result in better implementation outage. With all of that being said, thank you so much for listening to my presentation and Anneka's presentation. If we can then have questions and comments, if any. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Okay, so the first question is, so for the small farmers or someone from a local area selling directly to neighbors or at local stalls, do they get any special exception under the Act? Like up to how much milk can they sell without needing all the expensive licenses and inspections?
Thabang, so I think from my side, just R1555 has some considerations for smaller manufacturers and also handling of raw milk. I'm not sure that there's a specific exemptions regarding labeling and also regarding information. So what there is, however, is a regulation which is referencing specifically milk sold in bulk containers, so not sold to the consumer directly. But we can unpack this further. We can support you with this and give you an overview of this. The reference of R1510 and also the new regulation is specifically regulating standards in terms of how you would label and how you would sell the product on a equal platform or equal playing field. So if it's informal selling, there is provision made for that in R1555, which is the microbiological standards. So we can unpack that further if you want offline in an email or direct meeting. Yes. Thabang, is there anything you want to add maybe?
Yes, thank you, Anneke. In terms of your 1510 and also the 146, there isn't any exemption that is given, because even when you look at the title of your 1510, it says all the dairy products that are presented for sale in South Africa. So if you present something for sale, a dairy product for sale, then you'll have to comply with the labeling regulation, unfortunately.
Okay, the second part of the question is, will the small farmers or someone from a local area selling directly to people be made aware when the Act has changed, since most of them are old and don't have that much knowledge about acts and regulations?
Thabang, perhaps you can share some of the work that Dairy Standard Agency is doing in terms of communication to the primary and secondary industry.
Okay. In terms of our website, it's easy to it's actually user friendly. One can look into that, and also we have different guidelines, and also our office is willing to assist in terms of the labeling, if there is any maybe technical interpretation that one might request, or any clarity in terms of that. And also to highlight is that what one needs to look into is the regulations themselves, and not necessarily where the Acts is concerned, because regulations are those that can actually be practically implemented. Yeah, I don't know if I actually answer your question, but our office and I myself also is open for any to provide any guidance and clarity in terms of this labeling regulation and geocompositional regulation and all the regulation that actually talks to dairy. Thank you.
Perhaps just a note from my side, it is important that in a formalized commercial space, when selling a product, you are aware or you make work of informing yourself of what are the requirements for sale. So if we look at the regulations name, it says that these are the regulations relating to the different products intended for sale in South Africa. So if you are intending to sell in any country, you have to familiarize yourself with the current regulations. And so it's really the trader and the seller of the product's responsibility to be informed and keep informed. And so there are quite a few resources available on that. And as we say, we're in the age of information. So it's literally just a Google away. It's possible to check this online.
Another question is, when can we expect the revision of Regulation 1555?
The organized dairy is actually busy trying to coming up with a draft that can be submitted to the Department of Health to try and initiate some amendment to that. However, it is a difficult one to say when this can be done, because the Department of Health is inundated with all the processes of finalizing 146, the drafting of the amendment of 146, which is your 3337.
What are the implications of not having or incorrect information on labels?
Thabang, do you want to take this one? Or can I just give a quick overview?
Yes, you can go ahead.
So the inspection services of the Department of Agriculture they are responsible, or they have the mandate to implement this regulation. And so what you will have is inspection being done either by the inspectors themselves of the Department of Agriculture, or you will have the industry cross monitoring each other. So competition or competitors or retailers, where you have this agreement within the industry that everyone should abide by the same rules. And so if everyone isn't following the same rules, then there is the possibility to request clarity from the Department of Agriculture, bring this under their attention, and then this will be investigated and clarity be given, or a notice be given. It's typically called a directive that Department of Agriculture is then issuing, and the brand owner or the manufacturer would then be required to change the artwork. If the information on the artwork is a direct health threat, they could be asked also to remove the product from the shelf, and then, of course, amend the artwork or the non-compliance to the current regulations. Thabang, I don't know if there's something you want to add to that.
Also, again, if the information that is indicated there is grossly misleading, because when you look at your R1510 in terms of misleading and what the Act also say, and you also look at your 146, the regulations are actually quite big when it comes to misleading information on products. So this can actually result in your product being moved from the shelf if it is deemed to be grossly misleading.
While we are on this topic, so the other aspects of it is Consumer Protection Act. The consumer has the right to the accurate information. So anyone who deems this not relevant, so any consumer can request the Ombudsman to do an investigation if there is any information on the artwork which is not clear or is misleading in any way or false. Then the other aspect of it is also Advertising Regulatory Board, ARB, welcomes any request from any consumer that asks them to investigate whether something is following the requirements of advertising and that there's nothing misleading in terms of that. So there are different channels that are followed. Department of Agriculture and Department of Health is the governmental aspects, but then Consumer Protection Act is the publication from the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition. So that is also then the National Consumers, NCC is the ombudsman for that. And so they have to ensure that the Consumer Protection Act is implemented well. It seems like such a big mouthful, but that's what could be the problem if you have incorrect information on the label.
When will this be notified to the WTO? Is there an expected month or year?
I can confidently now say the department is working on concluding the resulting amendment draft of the dairy regulation, and it is intended to also submit it to WTO for notification as soon as possible. However, one also needs to also note that it is notified for a period of 60 days. And with all that I have outlined, it can actually, it will happen this year. However, it is really unclear to say when exactly this can be done. Also, what I've also outlined in terms of the process itself, there isn't any clear, outright timeline that one can put to these processes, because there might be a case where one would notify this to a draft amendment to the WTO, and a number of responses that are received require for the department to actually do a whole lot of changes to it, and all that can be extensive and all of that.
Okay, will there be a service where label designs can be inspected and cleared before printing?
This is something we actually had a discussion on while we were doing this work with the technical work group. It is our understanding that the inspection service, directorate inspection services have been re-established, and that there are some discussions. I'm not 100% sure if this is public or official. Thabang, I don't know if you have more details if they are taking labeling reviews or doing labeling reviews.
Currently, the department and also the inspectors are not taking any labeling for review or evaluation. What they can actually consider, if there is a specific provision, or marking that one requires clarity or interpretation of a specific provision in the regulation.
So what we can say from Dairy Standards Agency, if you're part of the organized dairy industry, you can submit queries or questions to us. So Thabang and myself do this regularly. We're of assistance to the regulation interpretation often, and also sometimes implementation. We can, however, not give a certificate of compliance because we are not inspectors, but we are very well versed in and also experienced in terms of the regulation and how it's been put together. So we can be an ally and a partner and a thinking platform together with you.
Also, the Dairy Standard Agency, we're also looking at having such a provision on the website where one can actually get to pay for all that guideline, where we will just outline exactly what the intention of the regulation means on a label, and that we're still working on. Maybe one should just be on the lookout for that.
Does not look like there's any more questions.
Well, thank you. This brings us to the end of this webinar. Well done, ladies. Thank you so much for really excellent presentations. I think you gave us a clearer picture this morning. But besides this presentations, thank you so much for your hard work and dedication. It seems like really it's a tedious process, and we as dairy industry greatly appreciate your great effort and hard work. So well done. We appreciate you. A recording of this webinar will be available on our website within a few days. So just go and have a look, www.dairystandard.co.za. And yes, make sure that you get that recording. Our next webinar will be on the 24th of June with a yogurt theme, and that is all that I'm going to say, but we'll keep you posted on social media. Make sure that you register and that you don't miss out on our next webinar. And that is all said. Thank you so much for making time to attend this webinar, and may you all have a wonderful, blessed Wednesday afternoon. Keep well.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.